Hi, and thank you for joining us for the security webinar that we are hosting today, zooming in on security. The purpose of today's meeting is really just around sharing some of the best practices that we're seeing in the current market at the moment in terms of in the current IT security landscape, the risks that we've currently witnessing pretty much on a day-to-day basis, and I guess helping raise awareness so that you and your teams can be more protected and prevent or limit the ability of potential attacks. So joining me today, I have Oscar Clift, and we'll run through the stats that we're seeing, how hackers are getting in, best practices, and we'll have a quick game around real or fake. So if there's any questions, please pop them into the Q&A or the chat box. We're also streaming this on a couple of other sites as well, including Facebook. So we may have questions coming in from a few other people as well. So when we look at the stats in regards to what's happening, it's easy to I guess underestimate what phishing can actually do. And what we're seeing is that phishing's been behind 91% of the security incidents that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. And of those phishing attacks, 93% of the time it involves ransomware. And what is ransomware? Ransomware is basically when you've clicked on an email and there is an attack that occurs. It might be an attachment that you've opened or a link that you've clicked on, and it could either lock down all of your emails, lock down all of the content on your server. And we'll go into that a bit later on in terms of the type of attacks that have occurred, and then we'll share some examples of what we've seen, some real life incidents that have happened and continue to happen. When we look through the security events by the seconds, what we're seeing is that every 10 seconds, there's a consumer getting hit with ransomware, and every 40 seconds, there's a company that's getting hit with ransomware. And in 2017, the estimated cost of ransomware was in the region of around $5 million. And it's fair to say that's a lot higher today. And just this year, I mean, there's been a significant increase in attacks that we're seeing, but a couple of larger ones that I'm sure a number of people are aware of or have seen. If not, Toll had a significant data breach. They got hit once, and then a few months later, they got hit again, and it basically took them offline to the point where the feedback we received was they were using pen and paper to record some of the jobs they were working on. And another example is the Australian government, one of their migration databases had 700 or over nearly 800,000 files breached of individuals that were migrating to Australia. So when we look at some of the numbers, and I'll get Oscar, perhaps if you can perhaps talk us through what is the impact of downtime when we're looking at ransomware?
Yeah, sure thing. So a big part of ransomware, and I guess what separates it from other virus attacks and cyber attacks we've seen in the past, is once they've locked down your data, they're demanding that you pay a ransom to get your data back. And as you can see here, in 2018, the average ransom demand that they were giving to you was $4,300, and that jumped up to $5,900 in 2019. However, that's not really the only cost that's involved with a ransomware attack. You look at, say, Toll, for example, they were unable to deliver all of their, freight work, I guess, that's going on was delayed. So that's a huge cost to the business based on downtime. And so the average from 2018 being 46,800 has now jumped up to 141,000, which is a fairly substantial jump. And that's really not the only cost that's involved to a business when an attack like this happens as well. You're looking at loss of business based on reputation. If you've lost control of your data and people, find out that you haven't done the right thing to protect your business and your customers' data, potentially they're going to go talk to your competitors. They're going to, protect the data better, basically. And on top of that, now you're also looking at facing fines. If you get breached, you lose control of that data, and the government finds that you haven't done enough to protect that data, and haven't got the processes and systems in place to prevent these things from happening, you're actually liable to pay fines based on the notifiable data breach laws. So there's a lot of these costs that people don't really take into account when looking at ransomware. And I think another part, which we'll jump into now, is that some of the data that gets, sorry, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do we generally see happen with that data?
Yeah, so a lot of the times this data, you've lost control, you can't access it, but the hackers can actually still access it. They've got the key to decrypt that information so they can access it. And you'll actually find it on the dark web where they're selling it to people, selling credentials, information, data that they've gotten a hold of. So I guess we'll jump into talk about what is the dark web, Jordan.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question. And the dark web is something that it's basically there's three types of webs. You've got your surface web, which if we look here, you can see you've got the sort of normal sort of sites that we would generally go to, Facebook, Google, and so forth. Then we've got deep web, which will be what a lot of the attendees on this call today would be accessing in terms of your internal networks, where you'd store everything in terms of on your servers and so forth. And then we have the dark web, where there's a good chance that most people on this call wouldn't be accessing the dark web and probably wouldn't want to. But what's there is basically it's an illegal trading platform. So you can do everything from purchasing weapons, drugs, whatever it might be. But what we see is that there's a significant amount of user credentials, and it's possible to buy a username and password for as little as $4 or $5. Really, we saw in Q1 of this year it was reported that there was 267 million Facebook user details sold on the dark web for $540 USD. So really cheap purchase there, and that's available. And we do monitor that, and we do look to see if our clients' credentials are listed there. But it's something that you really need to be conscious of, because once you've been compromised, there's a good chance your details will end up in the dark web. If we look at some of the examples of breaches that we saw in the last 12 months, we've listed a few here for you, some larger names with Bunnings and Optus and First National Real Estate, Hawthorn Footy Club, for those of us that are in Victoria, and a number of others. Obviously, this is just a small snapshot. We saw the Cabrini Hospital here in Melbourne also compromised, and they had 15,000 patient records taken down, and they were offline for quite a while, and they didn't have, one, they might not have had the right solutions in place to protect themselves. We're not 100% clear on what they did have in place, but what is evident is that there wasn't a continuity solution in place, so that if they were compromised, they could continue to operate and recover from that very quickly. So it's reported that they ended up actually having to pay a form of ransom to get some of that data back. We've seen Alcoa have a data breach as well. So there's and what hackers often say is that at least one employee will click on anything, and that's so true. We're all humans, and especially in the current times where there's just so much happening and so many emails coming through, it's really easy to sometimes miss something and click on the wrong link and fall victim. So what we'll do now is we'll look at how are hackers getting in, and we'll talk about what we're seeing and give some examples and go through what that looks like. And then we'll talk around the three core fundamentals of what we believe are of how you can protect your business. So in terms of, Oscar, do you want to maybe run through interaction and what that looks like?
Yeah, sure thing. So an interaction-based attack is basically where someone will get in contact with you and try to get you to interact with something that's going to deliver that payload into your system. So it might be getting you to click on a link that takes you to somewhere that's not what it claims to be. So you can see here, an Australia Post is an example. They're basically saying, oh, we've tried to deliver a parcel to you and it didn't get through. Please click on this link to go and fill out those details so we can redeliver it. And that link would probably take you to somewhere that's going to download a file, which has a virus attack embedded in the file. And it's as easy as that. So it's pretty dangerous, pretty powerful stuff as well, and they're getting seriously good at it. They can be really hard to spot, and yeah, that's pretty much at a high level what an interaction attack is going to look like.
Yeah, and so then I guess we have the next one would be macros, and often a lot of people would have seen a macro alert come up on an Excel document or something like that. But often what will happen now is we're seeing that hackers are sending through a file, and in that file there'll be macros that need to be enabled, and embedded in those is there's malicious code. And what will happen is immediately, as soon as you enable that macro, it'll start running through the documents and transmitting malware through the computer. So that's another example of it, of one of the attacks. A more common attack that we're seeing is the login attempts. So you might receive an email from, say, an email pretending to be like we have here, Office Outlook, saying you need to reset your password. It could be Google, LinkedIn. It could be, there's a range of different, templates that I guess these hackers will utilize. And this is a very common attempt that we see. And we'll talk about a scenario. Well, actually, we had a scenario where there was a director of an organization, and he had received a login email for Dropbox. Went in, entered in the emails, his details. So entered in his username, which was his email, his work email, and entered in a password. Didn't think anything of it. It was for Dropbox, and he has used Dropbox in the past. So he registered the account. A week goes by, nothing had happened. They hadn't locked down anything. Then all of a sudden one day, their accounts department received an email requesting from him, requesting approval for a payment of an invoice of around $22,000. So what happened was they responded back via email saying, "Are you sure?" And his response was, "Yes, it's urgent. I need it done now. I'm in a meeting, can't talk." So they paid out that $22,000. What had happened was the hackers had gained access because he used the same email address that he has for work and the same password that he uses for his work email. They were then able to gain access to his emails, and they could monitor what was happening. And they looked at the type of language he would use, and they looked at, when is he going to be in a meeting? We'll send an email then, because he's likely to not respond whilst he's in a meeting. That went through. There was the exchange between supposedly him and the finance department. The payment was authorized and released. The hackers went and then attempted to delete those emails. And it wasn't until later on that they identified what had happened. Now, with same time bank transfers, that money was gone. So that's the outcome of what can happen if you do fall victim to that type of attack.
And just wanted to add to that as well, Jordan, is that a lot of the time, the hacks that we're seeing these days aren't people sitting at computers typing code, trying to break into your system like that. They rely on these login attacks where people are just giving up their credentials because either they don't know what they're looking at, or they're just not switched on at that exact moment. But yeah, it's changing now, and it's less about breaking in, and it's more about just finding a way to trick someone into giving over the details.
Yeah, exactly.
Giving them access.
And often nothing will happen straight away. It's often later on, because they probably have too many that they've been able to compromise. They'll take time to investigate and understand what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fourth one that there's a couple more, but this one here, impersonation. This was an email I received. So a few weeks ago, we'd gone and announced our merger, and at the time, my email was listed as a contact point for any of the sort of the media inquiries. And all of a sudden, I started receiving a lot of emails from people supposedly, attempting to be Milan. Now, if you see really clearly, there was a few things that stood out for me. One, this isn't Milan's email address, so that was a dead giveaway. But two, internally, we don't communicate via email. We communicate via an internal platform, whether you might use Teams or Slack or whatever it might be. And third of all, Milan doesn't use an iPad. But I knew that he would never send me this email, but it happened really quickly. And then our team had to increase the level of security that was on my emails, and do a whole lot of things. And even still till today, there's still emails that I'm receiving And, we'll always continue to receive them because people look at what's happening in the media, what's happening in the news. They'll do things like you could be away on annual leave and they've sent through a targeted attack and they'll get that out of office. So then they'll do an impersonation email from you to somebody else in the organization, knowing that you're on leave and not likely to be checking your emails, in an attempt to, it might be something we've seen people asking to the finance department saying, can you buy 10 iTunes cards? I want to give them as gifts. Send me the codes once it's done. Things like that is often what we'll see. Another example, which is a little bit out there, is, and I think, Oscar, maybe if you want to talk through what popcorn time is, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So popcorn time is a fairly inventive ransomware attack that was released a little while back, where a typical ransomware attack, they're going to lock down your files and demand a ransom, and you might get your data back, you might not. Typically you will, because there's a bit of a code of conduct with hackers, and the word gets out pretty quickly if they don't decrypt your data after you've paid the ransom. So most of the time they will, but there's no guarantee. However, what popcorn time has done, it's kind of almost turned into like a multi-level marketing scheme where they'll say, we've locked down your data, go here and pay a Bitcoin ransom for us to unlock it, or you can send it to 2 people and if those 2 people click on this file and get locked down, we'll unlock your files for free. So it's a bit of an interesting one. And it just signifies that the cyber criminal world, they're always trying new things. They're actually investing in research and development to try and stay ahead of the security companies. So it's pretty scary. And this is just a particularly kind of, I guess you'd call it, evil one, where it's preying on those people that are worried, scared about what's going to happen and don't want to pay the ransom. So they'll just forward on to 2 unlucky people in their contact list and hope for the best.
Yeah, I hope none of my friends try that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next thing we wanted to look at, we've got this is an interesting situation that happened here, but where this gentleman here is obviously he must be of some importance. He's got his lanyard with his photo. He's sitting in what looks to be like some sort of surveillance room. There's a lot of maps and cameras and different time zones, and we can see here a map of what looks like North Korea, and a couple of things that we wanted to go through. And I don't know if perhaps if people can comment on what they might see as being wrong with this, perhaps, or if you can identify anything you've picked up by looking at this. But as we go through, the gentleman has posted. We've got this photo from his Facebook. Basically, so somebody's got a comment in there. So basically, what happened was this gentleman, this image here, this screenshot is a colleague of ours, Pete. He was in Hawaii a few years ago, sitting in his hotel room, and all of a sudden there was an alert that popped up on his phone advising of a ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Now, this was on the media here, it was on the media worldwide, and a few hours later, they received another message to say there was something went wrong and there's no ballistic missile threat imminent. And I think they called it a test. It wasn't actually a test. What happened was this gentleman, and Thomas, well done, you got that correct very quickly. This gentleman had on the photo, which he posted on his Facebook profile, his password. What happened was he was compromised and they hacked in and they were able to send out this SMS. So you can think about the number of tourists that would have been in Hawaii at the time when we could travel back then, and everything that was going on. It would have been absolute chaos, all because of a selfie at work. And if you look at what's happening today, there's definitely, we're seeing a lot of photos of Zoom meetings like this. It could be anything, and just being really careful of what you're posting and the types of information that are being shown, because even things like, that could potentially be his emails. It could have sensitive information on there, and all that type of information hackers will use to compromise you. So what we wanted to do now is look at some best practices for cybersecurity. And from our perspective, we see there being three main pillars to cybersecurity, and that is people, process, and technology. And the reason we believe that is, regardless of if you have the best technology, if you have the best process in place, people, we will always make mistakes. We're humans. That's what happens. And but they all, and again, you could have people being really on top of their game and checking things, but if the process falls down, things will go wrong, and vice versa. So an example of people, we had not a client of ours, but there was a situation with a real estate agency where they received an email come through, and it came through to the property manager, who she clicked on the email, and all of a sudden their server went down. There was a ransomware attack, and they lost everything. So they lost all of their rental database, and they had a lot of rental properties. They lost all the contact information, everything they had basically was gone. Now, they still had paper documents. So what they did was they employed, I think it was 2 or 3 people for 3 months to start manually data entering all that information back into the system. So one, you can think of what was the cost that would have been associated with that. 2, they had no idea about their trust accounting. So they didn't know what money was coming in or what was happening. And landlords weren't getting paid, and it was, and the way we found out about this was through one of their landlords. So that reputational risk we spoke about earlier, that impacted this agency significantly. But where we found out the full details was through another IT company. And what had happened was, not only were they not able to have this information and trade effectively, basically, with the way they needed to, the hacker had actually gone in and sent an email out to all of the tenants saying, here are our new bank details. As of this date, please start paying your rent into this new bank account. So once the tenants got that, they started paying money into those new bank account details, as you would. And as the office started to get all the information put back into the system, they realized that tenants were behind on rent. They started making these phone calls and found out what had happened. So they, not only did they lose, there was a reputational damage, there was the cost of employing staff, there was all the other impacts, then there was the issue of rent being paid out. So that was a massive incident. They're still trading today, and they're very lucky. I would say they probably had a good cyber insurance policy in place, because that was a big hit. An example of process, perhaps, Oscar, do you want to talk us through a process example?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good example here is a time we conducted a full day cybersecurity training session with one of our customers, and they flew in staff from across Australia to Melbourne to conduct this as an in-person session. And the focus was on security awareness and a lot of education around some new technology that we had implemented into their business. As part of this whole education and technology and security awareness training, they actually went back and implemented some new processes in their business. And one of the ones they specifically implemented was around invoice approval. And so all invoices would be sent to one person who would go and review those invoices to make sure the information on the invoice matched what was in their system. It would then be approved and go back to the finance team to be paid. About a week later, they received an invoice from one of their suppliers for a total of around $220,000. The finance manager received that invoice and forwarded it through to the person responsible for approving those invoices, which was, that person followed that new process. The finance manager followed the new process perfectly. However, the person approving those invoices failed to follow that process. And they didn't check the bank details on the invoice against what they had in their system. So that invoice was approved for payment. And they later found out that the supplier themselves had actually been compromised. Someone had gone in and changed their invoices to redirect the funds to a different bank account. And, because this process wasn't followed and the person approving those invoices didn't pick up on that, they actually paid a decent sum of money through to the wrong bank account. Luckily, It went through in 2 different payments. So the first one went to the wrong account. The second time they followed the process, checked the bank account details, found that they were incorrect, and kind of followed up with the supplier and said, what's happened? And they've gone, we've been compromised. But yeah, it's a specific example of a decent sum of money going to the wrong account, basically because someone failed to follow a process.
Yeah, and that's one that's so common, and it may not necessarily be for an invoice that big. It could be for something even smaller, and we're seeing a lot of that. Definitely, it's not. It might not be you that's been compromised. It could be the other party. So that's really critical to have strong processes in place, because you're just doing what you know should do and doing the right thing and paying an invoice, but the information could be wrong. So that's definitely that was a big impact. Luckily, they had insurance as well, and they were able to recover the money. So definitely speak to your insurance brokers and make sure that you do have a good, strong cyber policy in place. The last one would be technology, and we won't go too much into the tech part of it, but a couple of simple things that you could do here would be something as simple as multi-factor authentication. That's a big step in preventing a phishing attack. If there's an attempt, they need the code, and you'll be notified if you receive a code and you haven't tried to log in. A password manager is another solution that is really inexpensive and effective. If you know your passwords, they're not that secure, and it's very common for a lot of people to have one password that's used across a whole lot of different platforms. But again, the incident that we'll see happen is similar to the one I mentioned earlier, where the director of that business had used the same password he has for his emails for the Dropbox account that he'd set up. And that's not uncommon, but having a password manager, what will happen is you'll get to the point where you don't know what your emails are, because the password manager takes care of that. And that's the most secure password you can have. If you don't know what it is, there's a good chance that it's going to be secure, and you're not going to have changed whatever the password is, Collingwood Footy Club 123, and then increase the digits at the end. That's definitely a common password you see out there. So they're two really simple things. There is a lot more that you can go into, and one of the things that we can do is a security audit and sort of detail areas within the business that you're exposed, and risks that are there. So if that's something you'd like to learn more about, we're happy to have that conversation, and we have been doing a lot of those over the last few months, especially. So in terms of, what do we do internally here with a lot of our clients is from an education perspective, there's a number of things we do. So it could be a session like this. It could be generally we like to do these sessions face to face. So whether it's a fake phishing email attack, so we'll regularly send out fake phishing emails with the client's approval. We'll always speak to clients first and make sure they're comfortable. And generally only one or two people in the organization would know that we're doing this. We'll send out a fake phishing email and see what happens. And often there's owners or other senior leaders in the business that will click on it. It could be anybody. It doesn't matter what your role is. Everyone's just as equally, a good chance of clicking on something. Password education, training and compliance courses, and security awareness training. So what we do is when we're sending out fake phishing emails, off the back of that, if you have been phished and it submitted your details, we can look at the reports and see, does anybody need some additional training? And it's not about, anyone getting into trouble. It's just around that constant regular awareness. And that's the most important thing that we see, that often businesses will do a big session on it, but then it sort of fades away, where what we like to do is make sure that we at least monthly have regular training that will occur, whether it's, and also those phishing emails. And then at a larger scale, we'll do a more formal training session with a team or a business. And, that's, again, happy to share some resources that you can use internally. And that's not a problem at all. You can do that yourselves, or we can give you some tips as well. The last piece that we wanted to do today was real or fake. So just looking at some websites and trying to identify if they're real or fake. So if you'd like to maybe comment in the chat section or send us a message if you're on Facebook, real or fake, what do you think? Is this a real or a fake website? And Oscar, maybe I'll get you to give the answer if you want around what it's a good one, but what would
Yeah.
I guess?
Yeah, I actually got this one wrong when Jordan asked me the first time, but this is actually a fake page. It looks pretty much exactly the same as what the Office 365 login page does look like, apart from those red boxes around the login details there.
Yep. And so we've got a fair few fakes there, which is good. Um, we've got, and what about this one? What are your thoughts? Is this real or is this fake?
Yeah, I'll give some people some time to answer.
Real.
Yep.
Real. We've got some
Yep.
reals there.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, this one is real, and you can tell typically by looking at the URL at the top of the page there. You can see accounts.google.com matches the login page that we're actually looking at, and Google's a pretty reputable one anyway. So
Yeah. And so the main thing there is the google.com. Often we'll see something, it might be google1.com, or there might be something added on. Another one that we've seen, it was a phishing alert email address for Microsoft that had been set up, but they used two N's instead of an M. So you're reporting fake phishing emails to a fake phishing email account, which is interesting. The other thing that we often hear, Jace, which is not on the call today, but he'll talk about, often it's the opinion is that if you see this little lock up here, that makes the website safe. And in a lot of the cases, that's correct. But often what will happen is that's really just determining that domain name is secure and the link to that is secure. So if it's a fake website and it has that, it doesn't mean that it's the original or legitimate website. It just means that that's a secure website. So that's also something to be conscious of. And then the last one we have here, what are your thoughts? Real or fake? Microsoft login page, Hotmail, live.
this one's actually real. Yeah, this is a real one. But it's, I think, a bit of a leading there, putting out the different information that you see on the page. But yeah, Hotmail and Live are all pretty much the same website now, I believe.
Yeah. So again, live, and the thing with live, it's not that common of an email platform. Hotmail used to be. I don't know too many people that still have a Hotmail address, but again, that live.com domain name there. So that's I guess all of our real or fake scenarios. One thing that we wanted to do, if anybody would like a free dark web scan to see if any of your credentials are listed on the dark web, please feel free to either send us a message via a direct message to myself now or Oscar, or just simply reply back to the confirmation email that you would have received prior to today's webinar, and we'll send out a dark web scan for you. We'll go through and look at, are any of your details listed on the dark web, and it'll have all of that information on there for you. Do we have any questions perhaps that anyone may have that would like to ask?
I guess while we're waiting for a few questions to come through, I'd just like to add that pretty much no one is safe from those credential harvesters and the ones they're selling on the dark web. I believe Barack Obama's LinkedIn had his credentials stolen and for sale up on the dark web at one point. So, and some other really big name, celebrities were caught up in these attacks and being sold on the dark web for dollars each. Like, it's not expensive.
I've got a question that came through here, Oscar, just asking what's patching? They hear about the terminology patching. Maybe do you want to explain what patching is?
Sure. So Microsoft and a lot of companies release pretty consistent updates to their software versions, and that can be looking at, you know, improvements in the product itself. It can be looking at fixing bugs, and also a lot of it is fixing security vulnerabilities that have been identified either by Microsoft themselves or third parties. And so patching is basically keeping up to date with those latest versions of the software, so that A, it's working at the latest version, which is usually the best, not always, but usually, and B, it's patching those security vulnerabilities that have been identified in the last, you know, few weeks to a month.
Yeah, excellent. Do we have any other questions that anyone else has? No, if not, again, thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us. We appreciate you taking time out of your days to do that. Again, the whole goal of this was to help raise awareness from a security risk perspective. We will send out a recording of this with the YouTube link tomorrow. And if any of your staff missed out or you'd like to share it with any of your staff, please feel free to do so. But again, thank you for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it, and have a great day and a great week.
Thanks, guys.